Coaches under the most pressure heading into the 2026 football season. We're just days away from college football kicking off another season. But before we do that, I wanted to make a video about the coaches under the most pressure going into the football season this year. Now, before we start, I'll say this. Every coach at every program is going to be under pressure this year. There's expectations to win, especially with people investing their money and paying players now. They want to see results. So every coach in the country is under pressure. But today's video is about coaches under the most pressure in the country. Before we start, let's talk about our West Virginia Mountaineers. Now, by no means do I think that Rich Rodriguez is on this list. He's not on a hot seat list going into the season. It's year 2. Year 1 was disappointing, but if you look at the roster last year with all the injuries to the skill position players and the banged up offensive line, and the fact that there was a late start to the transfer portal and they held some money back for this season, it was almost like a year 0, right? So Rich Rod, I think for him, just expectations for him going into this season is that we need to see vast improvement from last year, right? Last year was not a good start, but again, I think any educated fan knows the circumstances that West Virginia was under. So, in my opinion, for Rich Rod this year, I think the expectation is to improve the results on the field, obviously, right? Can you get to a bowl game? Can you have a winning season? Now, to some fans, that won't be enough. Some fans will be disappointed by that. But for me, if we're talking about a step in the right direction, I'd like to finish with a winning record this year. And that would keep the pressure off of him. And then year 3, you're really looking at a team that could do some damage, right? But I think anything short of a bowl game, he could be on this list next year if they failed this year like they did last year and only won 4 games. And the expectations nationally isn't high, but to me, the fan base expectation is starting to grow, and we're starting to believe in this roster. And you think about the schedule ahead for the Mountaineers, and it's very winnable early. I do think that there's going to be an expectation to get off to a hot start and get this thing in the right direction. So, again, Rich Rodriguez, not on this under pressure list by any means, but I do think there's going to be an expectation for him, at least this year, to get it rolling and get some more wins and get back to bowl eligibility and finish with that winning record. All right, let's get into the list. Before we do, if you're a West Virginia fan, please remember to like and subscribe to the show. With that being said, let's get into it. All right, so let's start off in the Big 12 and talk about a few Big 12 coaches here. I want to start off with Coach Prime, Deion Sanders. Now, let's talk about how it started for Deion Sanders, right? Came over from Jackson State and brought some talented players with him. And you had no idea how this was going to roll. He's a flashy coach. He's a guy that is confident coach. And you knew that he could bring talent to Colorado based on his name alone. But we weren't sure if it would exactly work because he's not your stereotypical head football coach. And in the beginning of his tenure at Colorado, it looked like there was a chance that he could catch lightning in a bottle. They had the huge win versus TCU in week 1. If you remember, TCU was coming off of a national championship appearance, right? They didn't do good in the national championship, but they came off the appearance. And it looked like they had potential there, right? They started off with a good record in the beginning, but then they played Oregon, got exposed, and then the Pac-12 schedule, they could not compete in that conference, and then they finished 4-8, and it was a tough season for Deion Sanders there. Then in 2024, college football throws a curveball, and Colorado's in the Big 12, but Deion had a lot of his roster back, mainly Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, and they had a nice first season in the Big 12, 9-4. But then last year, you knew there was going to be question marks with the losses of those guys. They're NFL talents, and you were wondering, could Deion do it without a son? Could he do it without Hunter? And the answer to that was no last year, right? 3-9. We saw them firsthand in Morgantown, West Virginia, beat them in Morgantown, and it was a tough year for Deion Sanders. Now, Colorado, it's going to be interesting this year what happens here because, again, he's 16-21 there at Colorado, And Colorado by no means is a football factory, but there's going to be eventually an expectation to start winning some games. And you would think if he had a season like he did last year and finished with 3 or 4 wins that he did in 23 and 25, the pressure would definitely ramp up on him. And the other thing you have to consider with Deion is just his health. That's no fault of his own, right? Obviously, we're happy that he's healthy now. That was scary last year, but he's had some health issues, and you wonder without his son there, how much longer does he want to do it? Now, he says all the right things. He says he wants to coach, and he is a very competitive guy, but he also has a lot of options, right? Deion Sanders could do a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be coaching in this NIL era. So how much does he really want to coach, especially if they struggle this year? Look at the schedule going into the season. They play Georgia Tech week 1. That's going to be a huge measuring stick game, right? Georgia Tech has been a program that has been gaining momentum, in my opinion, in that ACC and has really turned their program around. Can Colorado win that game and get this off to the right foot? Because they desperately need to get the momentum back in their favor. And then to open up Big 12 play, they play Baylor, Texas Tech, and Utah. So 2 out of the first 3 games are going to be really challenging for them. Then they get Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Arizona State, Houston, Cincy, and UCF. So they're going to play some tough teams in the Big 12. Texas Tech, Utah, and Houston are going to be really tough games. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens to Colorado this year and Deion Sanders. Speaking of Baylor, Dave Aranda is definitely on this list. And if you've seen coaches under pressure or hot seat lists, Dave Aranda is definitely on there, right? And for good reason. He's 36 and 37 at Baylor. And you never know what you're getting with Baylor, right? Some years they might compete for a Big 12 title, and other years they fail to make a bowl game. And look at the losing seasons under Dave Aranda. 2020, 2-7. 2022, 6-7, 23, 3-9, 25, 5-7. That's just not going to cut it in this new landscape of college football. You need to win games. And look at the trajectory of where they've been. 4 out of the last 5 years has finished with a losing season, 22, 23, and 25. So, 3 out of the last 4 have finished with losing seasons for him. So there's going to be pressure on him to start winning games starting this season. And they play Auburn in week 1. They dropped that game last year at home. And that first game sets the tone. As Mountaineer fans, we know that all too well. When you play a Power 4 opponent, the preseason vibes feel different. There's an urgency to get the thing rolling. And West Virginia, unfortunately, dropped all those openers under Neil Brown. They lost to Penn State twice. They lost to Maryland. They lost to Pitt in that opener game. And it almost deflates the season before it begins. You could still have a good season. I mean, West Virginia lost to Penn State the first time we played them and still finished with a 9-win season. But you're just behind the 8 ball when that happens. And if you talk about a coach that needs to start winning right away, it's going to be tough. Now, Auburn is a team that has not been good recently, but they have a new head coach. And that game's going to be interesting to start off the season. And then they play Colorado in Big 12 play, Arizona State, TCU, Kansas, UCF, Iowa State, BYU, Texas Tech, and Houston. So Baylor is kind of like us a little bit as far as you need to win early, especially in that conference, because the end is just a beast. You play at BYU, Texas Tech, and Houston, 3 of the best schools in the Big 12. You can really rank those 1, 2, 3 in a lot of people's polls. So if this thing gets away from Baylor early, they don't start winning, it's going to be really tough as it looks now for Dave Aranda to keep going there. So they need to win early and get the momentum in their direction. Up next, we're going to switch over to the Big Ten. We have Matt Rhule. Now, in my opinion, I think Matt Rhule is a very overrated coach. Now, I know that he has some successful trips, right, that he's been to. Temple, probably his best work, right? 28 and 23. Temple's not an easy place to win at. And you remember Temple in College Game Day being there versus Notre Dame, and they had Temple really opening some eyes around the country when he was there. And then he took over a really tough Baylor job at that time and turned it around there, right? It made them respectable again. I know they were 19 and 20, but their circumstances at Baylor during the time were really, really challenging. And he did a solid job there. And then he goes to the NFL, and that wasn't great. And then he goes to Nebraska, and that's been meh, right? 5-7, 7-6, and 7-6. And again, Nebraska is, similar to West Virginia, where the glory days are kind of behind them, right? It's been a while since West Virginia has been solid at football. We haven't been ranked in the AP poll in a very long time. And Nebraska, talk about a program that has had the resources in the past, has won big in the past, but it's been quite a long time. There's going to be an expectation for them to win. You look at their schedule, it sets up really nicely early for Nebraska, a chance for them to get off on the right foot. They play Ohio in week 1. Could be a tricky game because Ohio, beat the Mountaineers last year. So that Ohio has shown to be competitive versus Power 4 competition. Even last year, Ohio played Rutgers really tough and took them down to the wire. So they've shown that they can compete with Power 4 competition. But Nebraska's going to be home for that game, unlike West Virginia. They should take care of business there. Then they get Bowling Green, North Dakota, and then they get at Michigan State, Maryland. So really, if you look at Nebraska, there's a good possibility that they can go 5-0 to start off the season. But then it gets tough after that. You got to play Indiana, at Oregon. Washington's going to be tough. Illinois is a program that's been doing good. Then you get Ohio State and a solid Iowa team to end the season. So again, a talk about a coach, again, similar to the people we've already talked about. You need to start early for these guys. But Matt Rhule, I think, again, he needs to start climbing the ladder a little bit here. 7-6 is not going to cut it at a place like Nebraska. All right, next up, we got Lance Leipold. Speaking of overrated coaches, I've been saying this for a while, because I think for a while there's been this idea that Lance Leipold is, killing it at Kansas, and that's not been it at all. If you look at the numbers, if you look at the numbers there, 2-10, 6-7, 9-4, 5-7, and 5-7. He's only finished with a winning record one time at Kansas, and I get it. Kansas, for a long time was the doormat of the Big 12 and a afterthought in this conference. But again, if you look at the investment that they've made in football, it's definitely a program that has higher expectations than they did when he first got there. They've upgraded the stadium there, and they've shown flashes that they can win again. So the expectations are going to be higher, and that's for Lance Leipold. That's part of that is on him, and he should get credit for it because he helped raise those expectations. But at the same time, if you look at the numbers don't lie. And one winning season in 5 years there is not going in the right direction. Last year finished very disappointingly. Last year, they bring back Andy Kotelnicki this year, offensive coordinator. We saw what they did and the success they had when he was there the last time before he went to Penn State. So that's going to be interesting in the Big 12 and what they can do with Kotelnicki, again, an offensive coordinator. Week 2 is going to be really interesting. They play Missouri. It's the border war. It's a rivalry that is very fierce. And if they could get the Missouri win under their belt, it would make you feel really good as a Kansas fan going into the Big 12 season. They play Arizona State, Utah, Kansas State, Baylor, TCU, UCF, West Virginia, BYU, and Oklahoma State on their schedule. They don't have to play Texas Tech, so that's good news for them. But again, Kansas and Lance Leipold, you got to start winning at some point, and it has to start this year for them. Up next, we have Luke Fickell. Really interesting one. Luke Fickell was a hot commodity just a few years ago coming over from Cincinnati, right? And for good reason. He had Cincinnati in the college football playoff, for crying out loud, and not an easy place to win at. And it seemed like Luke Fickell was on the trajectory of being a can't-miss hire. And then he goes to the Big Ten in Wisconsin, and it has been a complete struggle at Wisconsin since he's been there. If you look at his record, he's 17-21. Last year, he was 4-8 after going 5-7 the year prior. And I thought there was a good chance last year that Fickell was not going to survive that. And you got to think, if this continues, this trend, Wisconsin's not going to wait around. Now, it's very expensive to fire a coach. I'm sure Luke Fickell's buyout is pretty large, right? Because again, if you look at the contract he probably signed going into Wisconsin, I'm sure he had a lot of leeway to get him because he was a hot coaching commodity. But you got to think there's going to be an expectation for them to start winning this year. Starts off really tough for them in week 1. Play the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And I've seen a lot of polls out there, a lot of predictions that Notre Dame is one of the best teams in the country. A lot of people think that they could get over that hump this year and win a national championship. So that is going to be really tough for Luke Fickell in week 1. But after that, kind of opens up a little bit. Western Illinois, Eastern Michigan, at Penn State is going to be really interesting for them, because at Penn State is a team that has potential this year because their schedule, it sets up nicely for them. They don't play the big boys in the Big Ten. They don't play Indiana. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Oregon. So that is going to be an interesting game there. And they play Michigan State, UCLA, USC, Iowa, Rutgers, Maryland, Purdue, and Minnesota. But again, Luke Fickell's going to have to start winning right away. Up next, we have Bill Belichick in the ACC. And last year was a disaster for UNC. It was pretty eye-opening week 1 when they played TCU, and they lost 48-14. And it didn't get much better after that. They took it on the chin to UCF, got crushed by Clemson. But then they closed the gap. They played better at the end of the season a little bit. They only lost to Cal by 3. They lost to Virginia, who we're going to see in a few weeks, in overtime. They beat Syracuse. They beat Stanford, but then they dropped the last 3. We've seen all the noise in the offseason about what's going on at UNC. UNC, I still think, is a desirable job. Now, it's not UNC basketball, but it is a high-quality job, and I think a lot of people would still want that job. UNC has the resources, in my opinion, as far as an athletic department. They're not going to sit around. If this thing doesn't go well for UNC this year, I am not sure if Belichick would survive it. So it's going to be a win-now scenario for them. They get a chance to redeem themselves for TCU right away this year in week 0. So that's going to be a game to watch to open up the season. Up next, Mike Norvell. Now, Mike Norvell, a mixed bag, 38-34 at Florida State, and this guy, unfortunately, they probably should have been in the college football playoff in 23, but they got left out because their quarterback got hurt. And now as you only take 4, and are you as valuable without your starting quarterback? So it was kind of wild. They left out a team that went undefeated, but then after that, they haven't shown they can get back to that at this point. They're 2-10 and 5-7. So if you look at Florida State, the trajectory is going the wrong way. You got to start winning games there. Again, especially with a team like Florida State and a brand like Florida State that's won a national championship, recently. I know 2013 is not yesterday, but it's also not forever ago either. And this program has shown that they can get to the mountaintop with the right coach. And if you're not winning there, you're not going to survive there long. Week 3 at Alabama is going to be super interesting, right? That's an interesting series there. So that's going to be a tough game. And then also SMU week 2. So there's a chance that they could start off 1-2 to start off the season. And if that happens, the pressure is really going to ramp up and get loud on Mike Norvell. So you got to find a way to get the SMU game and fight and be competitive with Alabama. And then you got to play Virginia, Louisville, Miami, and Clemson. That's a really tough stretch in the ACC to really start it off. You look at SMU, Virginia, Louisville, Miami, and Clemson. Those are the teams that are really at the top of that conference going into the season. That's going to be a really tough schedule for them, in my opinion. It's going to be tough for Florida State, I think, this year. Up next, we have Shane Beamer at South Carolina. And again, a coach that's kind of had a roller coaster of a tenure there. 7-6, 8-5, 5-7, 9-4, and 4-8. So last year, probably not on this list. He was 9-4 and things were going good there, but then a 4-8 season, you can't have back-to-back seasons like that. Again, they have a chance to get off on the right foot early. Kent State, Towson, and Mississippi State to start off the season. So could start 3-0. Then you get Alabama, Kentucky at Florida, Tennessee, Oklahoma, A&M, Arkansas, Georgia, and then Clemson. So that's always tough, having Clemson on that schedule. I know Clemson hasn't been the old Clemson, but it's still a fierce rivalry and a program that could beat you on any given Saturday with the talent that they have. So Shane Beamer, expectation to win this year. Up next, we have Lincoln Riley, probably the most successful coach out of all these people. His numbers don't look nearly as bad as the other coaches. If you look at it, he's 11-3 his first year, 8-5, 7-6, 9-4. So Lincoln Riley has never finished with a losing record at USC, and even Oklahoma, 12-2, 12-2, 12-2, 9-2, 10-2. So has been a consistent winner, but it's when he left Oklahoma, everyone thought that he was going to take USC and make them a juggernaut, bring back the glory days of USC, and that has not happened, right? I know there was flashes with the 11-3 season, but ever since then they have not made the college football playoff. And I think that's the expectation. You got to make the college football playoff if you're Lincoln Riley, especially with the expanded field and taking 12 now. There's going to be an expectation to get there. So he's going to be under the most pressure. I think it's a win now thing for him, and you got to make that college football playoff. Just looking at their schedule, have a chance to start off 4-0. San Jose State, Fresno State, Louisiana, and Rutgers should take care of business there. Oregon game is going to be huge. Oregon is getting a lot of preseason hype. A lot of people think it's Oregon's most talented roster they've ever had. What does USC look like versus them? Then they got Washington at Penn State is going to be an interesting game. Penn State doesn't have many big marquee games on their schedule. That's going to be probably the biggest game on Penn State's schedule, in my opinion. So, Penn State is a tough place to play at. So they're going to be amped for that one. I'm sure that's going to probably be the whiteout game. It's probably already been announced. Then you get at Wisconsin, Ohio State, Indiana, Maryland, and UCLA. And UCLA, with Bob Chesney, could be dangerous this year. Up next, we have Steve Sarkisian. So, again, similar to Riley, his numbers aren't terrible at Texas, right? But USC and Texas have different expectations than your standard place, right? If you're West Virginia and you're winning 12, and you're going 12-2, 13-3, 10-3, your job's safe. You're not under pressure at that point, or you're underneath very limited pressure at that point, right? But at a place like Texas and USC that spends as much as anybody and has the resources and has seen national championships and are thirsty to get there again, you got to make the hay when you can. So if you look at Steve Sarkisian's tenure at Texas, he was 5-7, 8-5, 12-2, 13-3, and 10-3. So not bad, but again, there's going to be an expectation with the roster that they have to go on a deep run this year. You talk about Arch Manning at quarterback, you talk about Coleman, and they brought over Biles from Pitt. They're extremely talented team. They've spent more money than I think anybody this year. And Sark is feeling this team. You look at the comments that he said about Texas Tech. He believes that this team is going to be really, really good this year. They need to be. Again, we're going to find out about them in week 2 versus Ohio State. So they get them at home. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Arch Manning there. Last year, Texas ended the season on a high note. They won their bowl game, and Arch Manning played really well in that game. But a lot of people are going to have that wait and see approach with Arch Manning. And again, I think it's going to be a really interesting year. They got a really tough schedule, in my opinion. Ohio State, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Missouri, LSU, Arkansas, and Texas A&M. So it's going to be a tough schedule, but they have the resources, and they should be a really good team. But how good are they going to be, and what takes the pressure off Sark this year with a talented roster? All right, guys, that's all I got. Again, let me know in the comments, is there a coach that I missed that you think I should talk about? I think you could throw a wild card in there and say Lane Kiffin. I kept him off the list because it's only year 1, right? So the pressure is different there, but I do think there's going to be pressure, especially when they play Ole Miss. And I think there's going to be an expectation for LSU to win right away. So that's interesting too, but I don't think he's on the hot seat or anything. So that's why I kept him off. But let me know in the comments what you guys think about the video, and give me your opinion of other coaches that are on the hot seat as well. We'll talk to you guys next time on the JerseyEer Show.